Think of the worst employee that you have ever worked with. Why would you consider them the worst? In today's video, we will go through step by step the series of events that occurred with the worst employee that I have ever managed, how I fired them, and at the end, we will review the lessons that I learned from the entire experience. I have been a personnel manager within the supply chain for more than 12 years. In my career, I have had over 1,000 different employees reporting directly to me at one point or another. As is with life, there are a broad spectrum of high quality, average, and low quality employees. The names contained in this video have been changed out of respect for all individuals involved. However, the events, actions, and dialogue are real. It was at this time that I was the operations and hiring manager in my facility. During the COVID pandemic, the United States job market had more jobs than job seekers to fill the vacancies. This made finding and retaining high-quality employees very challenging. I had an entry-level leadership vacancy at my building, and we were fairly busy at the time. We were understaffed, and I was struggling to fill this entry-level leadership opening. I interviewed a candidate who we will call Luke in today's story. Luke had multiple years of entry-level leadership experience, which he did well to explain his leadership roles at his past employers in an interview. He did do pretty well in the interview, and he met the experience expectations for an entry-level leader at the company. He wasn't the perfect candidate due to his shorter than desired tenure with recent employers. However, he checked the other boxes, and I didn't think that I could find a better candidate in the labor market of 2022 during the pandemic. I made the job offer, and a few weeks later, he began his training as a new employee and new entry-level leader at my facility. It was during the orientation and forklift certification process that I began to notice shortcomings in this new hire. I observed that he didn't want to take any notes on the content presented. Now, I have seen and trained all sorts of employees on their first day and wrote this off thinking he was the type that had a photographic memory, not necessarily needing to take notes, as I have seen this before. This new employee exited orientation and forklift certification and begun training with his department supervisor that he would report to permanently. After a few days of training, the supervisor had relayed that training was going okay. However, it was observed that he again was refusing to take notes on some of the complicated system steps necessary to perform the leadership functions. The supervisor and I agreed that we should strongly encourage him to take notes. However, we were hoping that he had a photographic memory to help him perform his job duties. As he was learning other aspects of the job, he was doing okay and making positive connections with other coworkers within the department. So this was a mixed bag of results. Not all good, not all bad, but fairly common. At my facility, we use a training checklist that is featured in another video on the channel whenever we have new employees learning at our job. The training checklist contains all of the necessary responsibilities that an employee must be competent on long-term in order to fulfill the responsibilities of their position. After 4 or 5 weeks of training, we noticed that this new leader, Luke, was not retaining some of his specific details needed to fulfill his leadership responsibilities. The supervisor and I addressed this by telling him that he needed to take notes, and again, Luke refused to. This continued on for another 2 or 3 more weeks until I drew the line at the end of his training period. After 8 weeks of training, which is a long but not unreasonable amount of time to get exposure to all of the intricacies of the leadership role at my job, I sat down with Luke and reviewed the training checklist where he was able to explain the major responsibilities of the items on the checklist. He and I signed off on this training document as completing his training and placing him at the status of a regular entry-level leader. Immediately following the exiting of his training, he began to have productivity issues. He was performing his work between 60% and 90% of the expected efficiency. Upon speaking with Luke on his performance, he told us that since the company did not have a performance incentive program, that he was not motivated to meet or exceed the 100% efficiency requirement. I responded telling Luke that meeting the efficiency as an individual was a condition of basic employment with our company, and the presence or lack thereof a performance incentive program does not allow him to perform below our expectations. Luke said that he disagreed with this. However, I reinforced that this was our expectation and he needed to meet his efficiency numbers as it was a basic requirement of his position. The next time we had our productivity report ran, Luke was below the expectations again in the 80th percentile range. and I submitted the first step in the progressive disciplinary process to address his productivity performance being below our expectations. We will reference the progressive disciplinary process many times in this video, and if you have questions about it, check out the description below for a link to another video on the channel to understand more on progressive discipline. This employee did change his productivity performance after receiving his verbal warning. However, more issues were arising with this employee's leadership performance. This employee had been making some minor mistakes at the end of his training, and these mistakes had been repetitive. The supervisor had conducted multiple training activities on a topic. However, this employee, Luke, was having a hard time remembering all the details and the specifics of some of the processes, and he continued to refuse to take notes. After 8 weeks of training, this leader was on their own, making decisions, making errors, and making mistakes with no notes to rely on, as he was oftentimes failing. And his response when we spoke to him about his mistakes is that he was not trained. There was a mistake made on a trailer assignment in our system, which requires additional labor to fix the mistake. And we have a standard operating procedure on how to assign trailers, and it wasn't followed. I spoke with Luke regarding this, and he told me he did not receive appropriate training on the task. I, as the manager, pulled his training checklist and the SOP document and initiated a verbal warning for failing to follow proper procedures. An important point that I would like to make at this time is that I worked for a company that had a 4-step progressive disciplinary program, and in order to hold this employee accountable, I had to follow it as the building manager. I couldn't just fire this employee for being sloppy and missing a few points, and I couldn't just write him up just because I wanted to. But I had to show human resources from a documented standpoint that this employee was failing and progressively communicate his disciplinary relationship with the company per the policy. It was at this time that the employee Luke began to file complaints with our human resources department against me as his manager. These complaints ranged from unprofessionalism to poor management, to dishonesty, to racism, to favoritism, and to many other types of grievances in which human resources was required to open an investigation on allegations in order to prove them substantiated or unsubstantiated. For more information on the investigation process at a company, see the video link in the description below. I did spend a lot of time working with HR, answering their questions on the false allegations that Luke had filed. I found that he would take something that was true and just bend one or two of the facts of the situation that would paint me in a bad light, doing something that was immoral or illegal. Luke would take my words and spin them in a way in which he reported to HR that I was talking offensively to him, even when I was simply trying to train and instruct him on how to do his job correctly. I would give him objective and professional direction and context, and he would find a way to spin it as if I were guilty of whatever accusation he was able to lie and come up with to human resources. Yes, this was a pain to work through with HR. However, since my management style begins with respect, and I follow the same expectations that I have of my employees, I was able to exit these human resources grievance calls without fault by simply telling the truth. As time went on, Luke continued to make minor mistakes, and I would continue to provide feedback to Luke as his manager on his mistakes. There is a program called Documented Notes that I follow, in which I log small conversations so that in the event human resources needs to look at an employee's history, I have a list of the conversations and the issues with a low-performing team member. After a few more weeks, this employee had enough small leadership missed infractions that I was able to submit my documented notes on Luke to Human Resources. I received additional approval from Human Resources that this employee was failing to execute his position, using the training checklist as evidence that he was fully trained, and he was still falling short of the company's expectations to do the job right. I then administered a written warning to Luke for his leadership execution. Luke continued to submit human resources complaints and grievances for anything that he could against me. He was becoming more and more desperate to retaliate against me or attempt to discredit my authority and my decision-making in the perception of human resources' eyes. I would continue to attempt to give him verbal feedback on a mistake that he made, and he claimed that I was being offensive just by simply reviewing his mistakes with him in person. This toxic employee was rejecting my professional guidance, on one of his mistakes and playing the victim by running to HR and manipulating what actually happened through his complaint. I continued to work with human resources and keep my standing with the company clean by simply telling the truth again. I would like to pause this story and highlight the importance of honest and transparent conduct in the workplace. It is my belief that employees should always tell the truth and strive to have noble intentions in their motivations at the job. While I understand that we all fall short of this ideal perspective at times, the very fact that my leadership style is honest, fair, and sticks to the facts allows me to easily prove to human resources that this employee was lying about my conduct. I would like to encourage any employee, especially leaders, to stay away from politics, manipulation, and deceit. Small lies over time can create bigger lies that need to be told to resolve the smaller ones. A career or position that is built on lies is a house of cards waiting to fall when the right employee simply tells the truth once. A short time later, Luke made another leadership blunder that cost the company detention charges with one of our over-the-road truck carriers. Luke had failed to properly execute the leadership responsibilities and the operational priority sequence, and again claimed that he did not receive proper training. I was able to justify a final written warning using the training document that he signed off on earlier in the video. It was at this time that Luke began getting even more desperate in his retaliation against management. He would attempt to use safety as a weapon and make up situations claiming that they were unsafe, when in reality he was taking something that was true and bending it to fit a false narrative. Luke attempted to use safety as a way to leverage what he wanted, which was vengeance against me as the facility manager holding him accountable. I continued to stick to our safety procedures and call out his manipulation when I saw it, and I took good notes because he would run to human resources filing safety grievances that I had to again answer for. I was able to resolve all of these issues with human resources by simply showing that we follow our safety policies here at our employer. No matter what I did, according to Luke, I was wrong. I could wear a green shirt on Monday, and he would report me as being offensive. I could wear a blue shirt on Tuesday, and he would again report me as being offensive. No matter what I did, I was reported to human resources for anything and everything. In the end, after all was said and done, 0 accusations were proven by human resources to be substantiated. We had been preparing for a type of change in our operation for approximately 6 weeks. This change had come upon us, and I had done everything in my power as the building manager to communicate the expectations of this change. We did training, we did meetings, we did preliminary how-to sessions with the team. And during the first opportunity under the new program, Luke failed to recall any of the training and the meetings and the hands-on that we did with him, and he processed an order for his team members in the old and incorrect way. As I spoke with this employee following up, he again leaned into the fact that he wasn't trained, and I did tell him that a refusal to pay attention and to take notes does not qualify as not being trained. He sat through all of the training resources and he failed to properly take away what was needed, and he failed to properly execute them when the time came, and that is his responsibility, not mine. It was at this point that Luke realized that he was already on a final written warning, and he understood that I had been holding him accountable for all of his mistakes to this point. It was at this time that this employee walked off the job in the middle of his shift because he could see the writing on the walls. He knew that he would be held accountable for his mistake officially very soon, and he did not want to wait around for the termination news. And man, as I look back upon Luke's situation, I learned so much as a personnel manager with him. I learned that some people will do or say anything, no matter how untrue or vile it is, in order to get their way, to get back at you, to get vengeance for simply doing your job. I learned that in order to combat this, I needed to double down on honesty and documentation. I learned the power of documentation and how it can help with accountability, proving to human resources or proving to a lawyer, if necessary, that this employee was trained properly, that they signed off on their training, and they were still failing. My notes countered false accusations 1-for-1 evenly, and since there were no witnesses that could support the false accusations, they were deemed unproven by human resources. I learned that deficiencies in an employee's training should be addressed immediately, and if they refuse, to either enforce it as a requirement or expedite the end of their training process. I learned to make calling a candidate's professional references a requirement before making a hiring decision. If a candidate cannot provide professional references, there's probably a reason why. And I learned that holding employees accountable for their actions and their mistakes can lead to retaliation. If you as a leader do anything less than perfect, you may need to prepare to justify yourself in a conversation with human resources. And that's it. I wanted to say thank you for making it to the end of this video. If you have a crazy worst employee experience, comment down below. If you found value in the content provided in this video, like and subscribe. This is your Supply Chain Pro, out.